Today's episode, we're busting common myths in the cabling industry. You're going to want to hear this.
Don't hang up that phone. We've found what you're looking for. Welcome to the Let's Talk Cabling podcast with Chuck Bowser, RCDD. What exactly does RCDD stand for? Registered Communications Distribution Designer. Just the expert you need to ensure your cable plant performs exactly as designed. Now, send the new guy to the truck for a bucket of dial tone and the cable stretchers, while you listen to an informative program on telecommunications.
Welcome to the show where we tackle the tough questions submitted by installers, estimators, project managers, IT personnel, and anybody who has an interest in cabling. We're connecting at the human level so that we can connect the world. If you're watching this on YouTube, would you mind hitting the subscribe button and the bell button to be notified when new content's being published? If you're listening to this show on the podcast platforms, would you mind leaving us a 5-star rating? Those simple little acts helps us increase our presence in the algorithm, which helps get this message out to more people so we can educate, encourage, and enrich the lives of anybody in this industry. Thursday nights, 6 p.m., live stream on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook, where you get to ask your favorite RCDD any question that you want about estimation, design, career, anything. Anything's on there. You can ask. I can hear you now, but Chuck, I'm driving home at Thursday nights at 6 p.m. I can't really be watching you. They're recorded and they're put on at www.letstalkcabling.com along with all of our podcasts. So make sure that you visit them. So today's show, we're busting some cable myths that you hear quite often. And when we did this test, or these several tests, I took due caution to make sure I did everything exactly the same, so that way the only difference thing would be the difference of the components switched out within this test. So there are 3 tests that we did. The first one I wanted to compare was, if you buy product from your local big box store, Cat6 cable, Cat6 connectors, how does that perform against a commercial grade category 6 cable, commercial grade Cat 6 connectors? That was the first one. Then the second one I tested was, is there really a difference in performance between T568A and T568B? People tell you there's no difference. Some people tell you there is a difference. Today we're going to find out. And then the last one we're going to look at is untwisting the pairs. Does that really affect the performance? Because you hear half an inch for category 5E, quarter of an inch for Cat 6A. Does it really matter if you untwist them? So we're going to look at each of those 3 things, which meant I had to go buy some cable, some connectors, and terminate them. And then I had to use my Test Pro on it to make sure that I tested it. And then I sent the results to our favorite resident test expert, Steve Cowles. Steve, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Chuck. Appreciate you having me on.
My pleasure. I had to bring you in because I mean, I could look at them and I could talk about them, the differences and stuff, but I think you're more qualified to talk about those test results and stuff. So that's why I brought you in on the show. So the first one I want us to look at was where I compared the big box component stuff versus the stuff you buy at like a Gray Bar or an Anixter, the commercial grade. I guess they call it what? A tier 1 manufacturer? I think that's the term they use for it or something.
Yeah, you could be right. Yeah.
It's a very well-known, I don't want to say who it is, but it's a very well-known manufacturer of cabling and connectivity products, right? So when we look at those 2 test results, so when I sent them to you, I labeled them 1 and 2, so you wouldn't know which was which, because I wanted your true, honest opinion.
Okay.
So when you looked at those 1 and 2, did you notice a difference between those 2 in performance?
I did. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here so we can actually take a look at these results together. So let me pull this up.
And while he's pulling that up, for my people who are listening in the podcast, you might actually want to go over to my YouTube channel and watch this video, because we're going to pull up the actual test results so you can see them. But Steve will try to talk to it in a very descriptive manner. But again, you're talking a very technical subject, and it's easier to see it.
All right. So can you see my screen, Chuck?
I can. Yep.
All right. Great. So I've got the test you sent me opened up in our Test Data Pro PC software here, so we can, initially we're looking at a summary here. and we can see some margins here. So you wanted to look at which cables
We're
again?
so we're looking at test result number 1 and test result number 2, and we're comparing them to each other.
Okay, so initially, looking at it in the summary screen here, we can see in the summary we've got 2 columns for worst margin that show in the first column it's return loss, and cable 1 has a return loss margin of 7.4 dB. Cable 2 is 7.8 dB, so that's a little better on cable 2. And then for Crosstalk, there's even more margin. So we go from a 2.2 dB of crosstalk, the nearing crosstalk on cable 1 to a 4.4 on cable 2. And I can bring each of these up in a PDF report as well.
Let's do that. Let's do that, but let's talk about that for a second, because a lot of people don't understand this, right? So a decibel is a ratio of input power to output power.
Correct.
And because we're doing different tests, sometimes we want a big dB number and sometimes we want a small dB number.
Right.
So when you're looking at the near and crosstalk, the bigger the number, the more protection, or not the more protection, but the better performing is, because there's more separation between those interfering sources.
Right. In this case, we're looking at margin. So bigger number is better for margin, because the bigger number means you have more headroom between that noise floor, if you will, and where you're actually at. So what happens is, you want that headroom in situations where you've installed it, you've done everything right. But what if something happens down the road after the fact to the cable that you've installed that might cause a problem with it? If you've got good headroom in there, chances are it's still going to function fine. If you've got a case where you're like right up against the line, you're really close and your headroom is really skinny, and something happens, another trade comes in behind you, and God forbid they zip tie a piece of their wire or whatever down to your bundle of cable and crush one of the cables. If you started with minimal headroom at that point, now you're probably going to be right up against that line, and you could have problems.
Okay. Yeah, let's look at those graphs.
All right. So let me pull up. We'll pull up a PDF on cable 1.
And this is one of the functionalities that you get with the AEM Test Pro, the ability to pull these up and look at them like this, and then also email them easily between you and whomever you're sending the results to. In my case, I'm sending them to AEM. But you can be sending these to a customer, a consultant, somebody making your labels for you. You can easily share this stuff back and forth.
So the first one I've got here, I've got the PDF for cable 1, and we can scroll down, and we can look at those parameters, but we can also look down here at our headroom. Now, Crosstalk was a good one here. So this is cable 1. You can see this red line right here. And you can see that some of these are getting, close to that red line. There's still space in there, obviously, because it passed.
And that red line represents?
That represents the limit line. That is the threshold that if those spikes in that graph dip below that red line, it will cause a fail.
Okay.
So if we go to cable 2 and we look at that same graph, you can actually see the space in here. And I can pull these up in even better resolution. I'll minimize the PDF here, and what I'll do is I'll open up cable 1 and I'll open up cable 2. We've got a detail screen in here that it's very similar to what you have on board your tester itself. And let me do 2 things. Let me open cable 2 to give us another one. So we'll go Crosstalk on cable 2, and we'll do Crosstalk on cable 1. So let's look at our next graph. Okay, so this is cable 2. So we see we've got plenty of room here. So here, this red line is your limit line. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up cable 1, and we'll look at that same Crosstalk graph here. So cable 1, right here, you can see a couple of these have some spikes that are getting close to that limit line. And we can examine this and see what's going on. There's a marker you can show in here. So if I click show marker and I scroll over to these, I'll just maximize the window so we can actually see it a little better.
And just to remind everybody, cable 1 was the big box store cable and connectors. Cable test result 2 was the tier 1 manufacturer.
And we can see right here, this one where we're getting close. You can see that it looks like 4, 5, 7, and 8 had some crosstalk 1, 2, 3, and 6. That, both of those are getting close to the limit lines here. So it's pretty easy to see in this graph where you're showing the marker, and you can move along any other spikes that we had that were close. Here's one where it dips pretty close, and it's 3, 6, 4, and 5, which, remember, 3, 6, 4, and 5 are typically always going to be, when it comes to crosstalk, the worst case, because remember, those are split on the RJ45. Those two straddle the center pins 5 and 4. So you're already at a disadvantage on 3, 6, 4, and 5. And if you've got another problem where it wasn't terminated properly, it just compounds that, or the components, may be contributing to this.
Right. So looking at that graph, I noticed there are different colors. Does each color represent a conductor, or does it represent a pair?
It's representing a combination of pairs here in crosstalk. Because remember, when we're looking at crosstalk, we're looking at that bleed over from one pair to another. Think about the old days when we talked on a POTS line and you could hear somebody else's conversation. That's crosstalk. So you're looking at comparisons of pairs here. So like down here, we're looking at 3, 6, 4, 5. We're comparing pair 3 and 6, pins 3 and 6 to 4 and 5. So in a 568B wiring, that's going to be your green and your blue pair. So this is just different combinations of pairs that we're looking at, and it's color coded just to make it easier for the user to look at.
So there's more headroom for the tier 1 manufacturer over the big box store cable.
Exactly, and it's very obvious. I can move these windows around a little bit so we can actually see them side by side, and it'll allow us to get a look at the two side by side, and you can actually see that difference between the two. So if I just move these windows around, we can see the two graphs, and it becomes pretty obvious here where you see on cable 1, you're seeing it dip close to that red line. Cable 2, you got lots of room in here.
Right. So for me, and these are just my thoughts, and then let me know if you have what your thoughts are. So when you look at these two, they both pass category 6. They'll both work fine.
Right.
If you're just buying cable to run in your house, like for example, my house here, if I want to run a Cat 6 cable from my hub to my wife's computer and my computer, and I really don't care about having to go to Gray Bar or Annixter or CSC or Capital Radio to go buy buy cabling or something. Inside joke there between Steve and I. They'll both work fine. They'll both pass Cat 6. But if you're in a production environment where you're a company and you're putting in hundreds, thousands of Cat 6 cables, maybe even on one project, and you've got technicians who, unlike me or you, Steve, who have decades of experience, they may only have decades of months or weeks of experience. The selecting the tier 1 manufacturer, it gives that a little bit more room. So if that person is new to the industry, they might untwist a little something too much, or they might have, like you said, zipped something a little hard. It's a little more resilient.
Right. You want to give yourself every possible advantage you can, and using quality products when you're doing an installation just plays right into that.
Yeah, absolutely. And the additional benefit, and then when I looked at pricing, they're both very similar in pricing, which I kind of expected the big box store to be cheaper for some reason, but it wasn't. It was very similar in pricing. So to me, another advantage is a lot of the tier 1 manufacturers have warranty programs. Well, they'll pay you to replace something or pay you to fix something, where if you're buying something from the big box store, I'm not sure what their warranty is. It's probably 30 days, 60 days, maybe at the most a year.
Right.
Where some of the tier 1 manufacturers will give you lifetime warranties.
Right. Absolutely.
But if the warranty thing is not really a concern,
and
still
like
be
you
a better
said,
performing cable.
Yeah, if it's your house, maybe you're okay with that. You and I, we kind of geek out on this stuff, so we're likely to want to put the latest and greatest. I did my house.
You kind of said that, because I was going to point that out.
Yeah, 21 years ago when we built our house, I've got an on-cue panel up here in my office, and I've got home runs to every room. The only thing I'd have done differently, if I could do it over again, was to pull more cable, additional runs every place,
Yep.
knowing everything I know now. But because I've got that structured cabling in place in the house, as we've changed what we're doing for internet service and everything else, it's just been seamless. It's
Yeah.
great.
Yeah, I was watching a TikTok video last night, and somebody was pre-wiring their house for cabling and stuff, and what they did was they actually ran Smurf tube to all the locations. So if they decided later to change it, it'd be a lot easier. And I thought, yeah, that's pretty cool. I
I
would have
have
done it with
I
conduit,
have
but
Smurf tube. I've got 4 runs of Smurf tube running from my office up here down to my wife's office downstairs on opposite walls in her office. So if I want to put fiber in between my office and hers, I could do that if need be.
yeah, because single move fiber can go up to 50 miles, so I'm sure you're going to be well within that 50-mile limit. I'm pretty
Yeah,
sure
my
your
house isn't that big.
I was gonna say, yep. I was gonna say. So that's the official ruling there. Myth is busted. Cable connectivity from tier one manufacturers is gonna be better performing, but they both still meet the standards, and they both will perform to whatever specification. Cat 6, I think, was what I bought here. So okay, very good. Let's look at the next one. So
All
the
right.
next test, we actually going to look at cable test result number 2 versus cable test result number 3.
Okay, so let me pull up number 3 here.
And so while he's pulling that up, let me explain what we're looking at. So what I did was I used that tier 1 cable, the tier 1 connectivity products, and all I did was on the first one I terminated it 568B. So test result number 2 is 568B. Test result 3, I cut the ends off and re-terminated 568A. So everything's exactly the same. The only difference is the one test result was 568B, the other was 568A. Because we hear a lot of times A performs better than B performs better than A, or they both perform the same. I'm even been guilty of saying it in many classes that I've said that. I couldn't tell you how many classes I said they perform the same. And one day I was thinking, I got this tester, why don't I prove it? So that's what we did. So
first thing out of the gate, Chuck, I'll tell you, just looking at the summary, cable 3, if you look at your headroom you got here, your worst margin for return loss is 8.7 compared to 7.8 on cable 2. So there's an improvement there. And then for your crosstalk, you went from a 4.4 on cable 2 to a 6.3 on cable 3. So a much better improvement on crosstalk there too. So what we'll do is I'm going to pull up the graph here that we looked at before. So this is cable 2, the one that we looked at before. And then I'm going to go up and pull up cable 3. So you can see there's a considerable amount more margin. When we look at the graph here, we're looking at the plot of this information here. You've got quite a wide gap between that limit line and where our actual results are. And then if I go in, I'll pull cable 2 back up again, you should see that that graph will move closer to that line. So we look toward the bottom here, you can see some of these pairs actually moved a little closer to that line there. So you've got less room on this one on cable 2, and I'll go back to cable 3 again, just so you can see that jump versus cable 3, where most everything shifts up and away. You've got a lot cleaner look here, a lot more headroom on this. So a definite difference between 2 and 3. So Chuck, which one was A and which one was B?
Cable number 3 was 568A.
Interesting.
Cable test result number 2 was 568B.
Okay.
So,
now, and you tested them both with the meter still set at B, so that I wouldn't know, but when I looked at the results. I'd be curious as a follow-up that, just for you and me to do at some point, is to run the test again and set it to the A setting to see if it actually changes anything. My guess is it's not going to. You're going to see the same headroom difference here, but this was an eye opener for me, because I really didn't think there was any difference A or B. I didn't think it really mattered.
And there's nothing in the test or the tested differently when you go back and forth between A and the B setting in the test?
It's real. It's just the wire map is all it's doing. So it's just representing the wire map on the screen differently for you.
So myth is busted. 568A does perform better than 568B. So the Canadians have it right, because they're the ones who use A the most.
Right. But they're both excellent. They both perform, fantastically.
And that was my next question was going to be was they'll both work. I mean, is there enough of a difference here between what we're seeing between the A and the B wiring scheme to really affect the performance of a network?
Not that much. No, there's but again, you got 2 dB difference in crosstalk, which is significant. Remember, when we're talking noise, it's power. So 3 dB of noise, going from say 3 dB to 6, every 3 dB is going to double that power, double that noise level. So that's something to think about. There is a little bit of a difference there, but again, I would be interested to see. We should run this, just as a follow-up, maybe do it as a run them and set the tester for 568A versus 568B and see what
depending on how well this episode does. If it does really well, I'll do another cable myth.
Perfect.
And then what we'll do is we'll take a cable, we'll terminate it 568A, and then we'll test it, telling the tester it's A, and then just not change anything. Not even change the cable, move the cable or anything. Just the same spot. Just go to the tester and flip it over to B and then test it just to see
what it looks like. Yeah, it'd be interesting to see that. I could even try that in my office here.
Gotcha. Very cool. Okay, so let's look at the myth number 3. So in myth number 3, we're going to pair cable test result number 2 versus cable test result number 4.
All right.
Cable number 2 versus cable number 4.
So we can see right here, just in the summary, we've got a star pass on cable 4. Our worst margin is 6.8 compared to cable 2 we're comparing it to, right? Mm-hmm. So 7.8. So you got, there's a 1 dB difference there. Cable 2 is better. On crosstalk, cable 4 only has 0.3 dB of margin on crosstalk. This is going to be an interesting one to look at on the graph. So let me pull up the graph, and then I'll bring it over. We'll pull this up and let's look at crosstalk on the graph. Oh, look at that, Chuck. You've got your plot 4 here. This is cable 4. Yep. And if you look, you've got several spots here. I'm going to put my marker on. Several spots where it's dipping down really close to this limit line.
Yep. And again, you don't want to go below that red limit line.
Right. Exactly. So we're getting really close to the red limit line. That's it looks like we've got 1 and 2 and 4 and 5 are the big issue here. And we've got one here where it's almost touching. And that is 1 and 2 and 3 and 6 that are giving us that drop right there. So we're really, really close to the limit line right there. And you can see what the actual crosstalk reading is right there, 44.23, and our limit, 1, 2, 3, and 6. If we go over here and look at it, you're pretty tight there. So, we've really pushed this cable to the limit, and that's, you get the star pass on these because it means that while it's passed, it's really, really close to that failure point. And as an installer, you need to be aware of this. I always tell installers, treat a star pass as a fail. You need to go figure out why it came so close to that limit, because there's a problem with it, which means you have no headroom in this case. 0.3 dB is essentially no headroom. You're right at the line. And if you have any other problems, the cable is going to fail to perform as it should. So always treat a star pass as a failure. Troubleshoot it exactly the same way you would troubleshoot a failure. If it's a crosstalk problem, you can look at your crosstalk locator. So we can look in here, and this locator is going to tell me it's a TDR trace that shows me along my cable where is my crosstalk. And I've got crosstalk at both ends here. I can see a spike at both ends. It looks like it's a little worse out here at the far end. Looks like these cables are right out about 95 feet maybe. So you're looking at a pretty good spike out there at the far end. So,
and that makes sense to me, but it doesn't make sense to you just yet, because I haven't told you what we're looking at here. So
the other thing to point out, Chuck, is that this graph is also on board the tester. So you don't have to get this report back to the office and look at it in the software like we are. You can see this graph on the tester to help determine where this is.
So that helps them troubleshoot it out in the field.
Exactly.
So what we're looking at here was that on cable number 2, I terminated the jack using the way that a lot of people will tell you to terminate a jack. They'll tell you to take your thumb and forefinger, grab the pairs, do 1 or 2 twists to open up the pairs. So that way you're limiting how much you untwist it. And
Right.
then the second test result, number 4, where I basically untwisted the pairs all the way
Ah,
back to the jack and then routed in. So, but I made sure that my jack was back flush to the back of the jack, so that way there was still no more than 1/4 of an inch from where
right.
the cable exited the jacket. But once it exited the jacket, it was untwisted going up and coming out. Because some people like to use the untwist tool. Some people like to use a piece of the cable jacket to untwist it to make it easier
Yeah.
to kind of route and get in. So, and
Yeah.
that's why I said it makes sense to me because it's at the ends. That's where it
Yeah.
was twisted.
And I was taught, that you only open up that twist just a little bit, and you don't untwist it at the end. You get it at the point where you're going to push it down over that saddle on the termination block,
Right.
and you just open it up just ever so slightly, and then when you push that down over that saddle in the termination block, the saddle will actually separate the pairs and keep them snug right to that point of termination, and then you just punch down.
Very cool. Very cool. So the ruling here is the myth is busted. You don't want to untwist them. You want to keep that twist just like you and I both said. You want to untwist it, put it over the tower, and then use the tower to separate them. That way you got that twist as soon as it comes off.
Exactly.
And the result is here we were close. We had one to give us a star pass, but that could have easily been a fail if it didn't have the jacket all the way up to the very back of the connector.
Yep. It would have just taken just a little bit more to make that
Right.
fail.
Right. So in that scenario, if you get that star pass and you see those spikes at that end, like you showed on that graph, if I was a technician, I'd be cutting off both those ends and then re-terminating them and then retesting them to see if that solved that issue. Because that'd be a perfect example. That's a perfect example right there of the difference maybe of using the big box store cabling and connectivity products versus the tier 1 cable connectivity and products.
Ah, yeah.
Where because I used the tier 1, so the tier 1 just it was still right there. Had I been using the big box store cable and big box store connectors, that probably would have been a fail because
I'm
there was not
sensing a
enough headroom.
follow-up show.
Yeah, yeah, that is slick. I hope you guys are geeking out on this as much as I and me and Steve are, because this is just it helps you understand what you're looking at in the field. Okay, so the last one, we're comparing test result number 1. Oh, wait a minute, hold on. Cable number 1 versus number 5. Which is better? 1 versus 5.
1 versus 5. So 1 was the big box store, right? I remember that.
Yep, it was the big box store terminated 568B.
All right, let's close these out. And right off the gate, obviously 5 failed. So we know we have a problem there. Let's I'll pull up the graph for whoops, I pulled up 2. Let's pull up 1. So we got
Now, I noticed on your
1.
screen that it doesn't list them in alphabetical. Well, it goes cable 2, cable 3, cable 1. Was that the order I sent them to you in, or does it?
It goes alphanumeric. If you had used the number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5,
Gotcha.
I could sort them in order, but what it does, it's going to sort them alphabetically. So, so 2 comes, it's, if I go alpha from the beginning, 5, F is
Gotcha.
before O and before T. So it's just,
Makes
it's just
sense.
yeah. So we got 2, we want 5. So let's look
It's
at 5.
cable test result 1 versus cable test result number 5. 1 versus 5.
Well, let's take a look. So we've got some problems with cable 5, lots of failures. First off, we got split pairs between the green and the blue. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that you just didn't, you made intentional wiring errors, but you did these same errors on both ends. So that
Exactly.
you just didn't care what was going where, as long as one, yeah. You
Yes,
split
exactly.
Yeah.
So another myth that you hear often is the tester or the network doesn't care what color cable's on which pin number, as long as it's straight through, it's okay. So what I did was I put Let me look at my notes again. So I put white blue on pin 1, blue white on pin 2, white orange on pin 3, orange white on pin 4, and then we'll just kind of work my way across in straight order. I didn't follow the A or the
Yeah.
B wiring in the jack.
Okay. So what happens when you do that is 1 and 2 is still a balanced pair. 7 and 8 is still a balanced pair, but 3, 6, 4, and 5 get split. When you do it that way, because you're going 3 and 4 are now a balanced pair, which is not right. So it shows up as a split pair, which dramatically increases crosstalk. So let's take a look at the crosstalk plot, because that's going to be the eye opener, I think. And at first I was like, oh, it's not that bad. But look down here at the bottom of the graph. We see the plot. We see the limit line. We see some of these are dipping past the limit line.
Right.
But look way down at the bottom of the scale here on our plot.
This way below that red line.
You got two pairs down there that are they're like at the bottom. They're down in the toilet there, well below that limit line. So there's an issue. And we can look and see. We'll show the mark. We can show the marker here and take a look and see what these are. And it looks like 3, 6, 4, and 5. Wow, imagine that. 3, 6, 3, 6, 4, and 5. That's your splits.
Yep.
So, and that's the big issue when you get a cross pair or a split pair rather like that, is that you just have huge, phenomenal amount of crosstalk. And it's obvious in our graph here. We can see that they literally are at the bottom of the graph here.
Yep. So the takeaway here is you've got to use either A or B. You can't do a straight through. The tester does care. Well, it doesn't necessarily care about the color, but it cares about the pairs because they're balanced.
Right. It's looking for balanced pairs. And if we go back and look at the summary, the wire map is still showing, except for where we got that split. It shows up and represents it as a split pair by flipping it in the middle and flipping it back. So that you've got a problem there. Mm-hmm. So it's you have a split pair issue. It doesn't care about color code. It cares about the performance. So and you got a lot of stuff that failed. Insertion loss, blew out, return loss.
Go back to that one chart. What were we just looking at? Oh, that's insertion loss.
Yeah, insertion loss, and then you got your return loss, which blew out here. I mean, it's all over the board on this. ACRF is going to be messed up because, of course, that's part of insertion loss and crosstalk go into that, and then PS next, same thing. So everything. Once you started failing on these, it's a cascade effect on all the other test parameters,
because a lot of the tests kind of overlap.
They intertwine. Yeah. So ACRF is dependent on insertion loss. It's dependent on crosstalk. So there's a lot that goes into that.
So ACRF, that's attenuation to crosstalk ratio far end, correct?
Correct.
So, and what does that exactly mean?
It's a formula where they take the I'm going to get the formula wrong here. They take the crosstalk and subtract the attenuation. If I didn't get that reversed, catch me off guard there. Yeah, no problem. But it's a formula using those two parameters.
Very good. So, and that's one thing I love about testers, and I love about what we do, because if you were just looking at the table of numbers, most people they don't really get the impact, right? When you graph it out like you're showing here, I mean, it's clear. You got your red curved line. That's the go, no go. That's the DMZ,
right?
And as long as you stay on your side of the DMZ, you're good to go. And the further away you can stay away from that DMZ, the better you are. If you see anything touching that DMZ or going on the other side of that DMZ, then there's a problem. That's why I really like the graphs, because you can look at them and within literally a half a second, and you can see like when we got on the screen right now, I mean, that's down in it starts off in the 25 to 30, but then it drops below 20 for the rest of the graph. And there's a problem there.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely.
Very cool. Those were the 4 test results that the 4 myths that we busted. So
this was fun. I like geeking out on stuff like this.
Yeah, I do too. Because it helps to really reinforce what we've been taught and what's written in the best practice and stuff. And that way, you know, there's not just some old people just writing that just because they want to make your life difficult. There's actual reasons behind this.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And there's reasons why you might want to choose to do it the way the best practice. Because there's a lot of people who say, well, you know, that it's not written that way in the standards, but it's written that way in the best practice. So what's really the difference? Well, the best practice is going to give you the best performing, the better chance of not having an issue if somebody does something wrong.
Right. And you know, typically the standards are there to make sure that it's done and will perform within certain parameters. When you follow best practices, typically best practices improve upon the minimum you need to do to meet the standards. So, you know, if you're following some best practices, then you're giving yourself every chance to get that extra headroom that we talked about.
Very interesting. So for my audience members, if you enjoyed this concept where we take cable myths and then we test them and then actually show you the difference between them, if you like this, let me know. Shoot me some things that you want us to test, and we'll create that, and Steve and I will test it, and then we'll give you our opinions on it. And I think anybody look at the screen, it's not a matter of opinion. I think it's a matter of fact. Just by looking at the screen here, there's no opinion in this. So, Steve, I appreciate your time.
Glad to do it.
Hopefully we'll get to do more episodes of this.
Sounds good, Chuck. Thanks for having me on.
My pleasure. Okay, everybody else, remember, knowledge is power.
That's it for this episode of today's podcast. We hope you were able to learn something. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on future content. Also, leave a rating so we can help even more people learn about telecommunications. Until next time, be safe.